Hello and welcome back to Jack Knives Reviews. I'm of course your host, Jack Knives, and welcome back to JACK-O-WEEN. Let's take a look at Ari Aster's newest work, Beau is Afraid. A sexually repressed schizophrenic named Beau finds out that his mother has died and he needs to go across the country to go to her funeral. However, Beau is too afraid from his own past trauma, especially now that the world has seemingly been overwhelmed by Beau's paranoid delusions. So, I don't know how I feel about this movie. It's definitely of Ari Aster's work, who, if you're not familiar with him, he created the movie Hereditary and Midsommar, which are both amazing movies in their own respectable rights in the horror genre, bringing about the aesthetics of visual and what's considered elevated horror to a new genre. And from all accounts, he created those movies and his first movie, Something About the Jeffersons, which I do not recommend, don't watch it, to make this movie. Apparently, this was his magnum opus, the movie he always wanted to make. Now, every filmmaker has essentially a magnum opus, which can be hit or miss, depending on the director. For example, one of Stanley Kubrick's was 2001: A Space Odyssey, and the other was AI, which unfortunately he never made, and Steven Spielberg ended up making. Just as an example. But for Ari Aster's magnum opus to be this? So, I try not to get too much into spoiler territory. So, it's very hard to talk about this movie without giving away too much. However, unlike other reviews I generally do, I have no problem spoiling this movie, because this movie is essentially a man who is unable to get his rocks off, as it were, being horrified and tormented by his own schizophrenic paranoia, and yet dealing with it in the most irritating way, where it's just him running around. It might as well just be called Things the Movie, because it's things happening at the character, not things happening to the character. And the things that are happening at him, granted, are extremely visual, and some of the stuff ranges from disgusting and gross and weird to actually very well done and beautiful. Specifically, there's a scene where he goes into the woods. When you're a filmmaker, there are specific cardinal rules that are unspoken but are pretty much assumed that everyone's on the same ballpark. One of those is show, don't tell. Why explain a thing when you could just show the thing? Another one, and this is the one that this movie breaks, do not repeat what we already saw. And not only does it repeat what we already saw, there's an entire, I believe, 11 to 10 minute sequence that is literally recapping everything we just saw, but in a different format. It's pointless. It halts the story progression when you do that. Why recap to the people who've been here from the beginning? It would be like in Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, them explaining everything that led up to that point. This is the third movie. You should have been caught up before then. It's the same principle. There's no time to breathe. And yet, at the same time, it feels like it drags. When I watch a movie that's good enough, for example, The Batman, it was such an amazing movie, I lost track of how long it had been. A lot of people are deterred by the length of time, but when you're watching the movie, you're not thinking about the time because you're so invested in the movie. For example, if I'm watching a documentary or a series, I'm invested into it so heavily, I don't even keep track of time as far as what I've seen. This movie is 3.5 hours long, and it feels like 6 hours long. It feels like it drags so hard. Ironically, I did a movie about scared, paranoid schizophrenia that's unmedicated, and it was called The Voices with Ryan Reynolds. And it was done better there. Why? Because when you portray madness, you need to parallel it to the real world. What does that mean? It means you need to show the contrast. Storytelling like an eye exam. When you go to an eye exam, what do? They show you a series of different lenses until it finds the right fit. You choose as a visual which you prefer, real world or the fake world. It's the same thing, but here you don't get to see the real world. Past the 5 to 10 minute mark, you're on your own. It's all what Beau's seeing. And what Beau's seeing ranges from the dumb to the not making sense to just the grossest, weirdest stuff. Every reaction or review I saw of this didn't want to give away the spoiler of the movie, which was the infamous attic scene. And I don't even know if I want to give it away, but I will. You know what? I'm gonna give it away. The whole reason Beau has been afraid the entire movie and his whole paranoid schizophrenic delusions come from the issues with his mother and father in a sexual way. Specifically the fact that his father is a giant hot dog, as it were. And he's not just a giant hot dog. He's a giant hot dog with tendrils and teeth. And he's chained in the attic. That's the big twist, people. I saved you 3.5 hours. I can't, in good conscience, recommend this movie. And I love Ari Aster. I really do. I put him up there with the likes of Michael Dougherty or Jordan Peele, of these new wave of horror directors that just bring in this atmospheric tension and build to just this crescendo that is the horror genre, and just bringing in new elements and just bringing in new perspectives. But then he goes and makes this movie, and it's not scary, it's not horror, it's just weird. And I gotta ask the question, not from a perspective of a person who is necessarily critical of Ari Aster, because I love his work, except for this and there's something about the Jeffries. I love 2 of his works. I love Midsommar. I love Midsommar. I think it's one of the most visually beautiful horror films I've ever seen in my life. And I love Hereditary, the concept of dealing with this emotional trauma and it being just as horrifying as this whole otherworldly supernatural elements at the same time. Brilliant. But this, it makes me second guess him. And it bugs the shit out of me. And I just can't recommend this movie. I'm sorry. If that upsets a lot of people, I'm sorry. And if I ruin the movie for you, you know, I wish someone had done it for me. I'm sorry. And hopefully the next review I have is better than this one. Come back next time and we'll look into more horror movies on JACK-O-WEEN.